Hey, friend, please subscribe. 1 second for you. Big deal for me. I didn't cry at the reading of the will. People noticed. They always do when a daughter keeps her face still while a lawyer reads out the particulars of a life reduced to paperwork. But the truth is, I hadn't known how to cry for my mother in years. Grief needs soft places to land. Ours had been all corners and edges for as long as I can remember. The house came to me just as the rumors said it would. The old place on Willow Street, 3 stories of peeling paint, and a roofline that dipped like a tired shoulder. My brother, Paul, got the lake cabin. My mother's jewelry was divided. The china she loved, rose pink with a spiderweb crack down the serving platter, went to my aunt who never once washed a dish in it. And the house. The house came to me with a single sentence attached to the deed in my mother's square, schoolteacher hand. Keep what's worth keeping, and with a breath of kindness, blow the rest away. That was it. No apology, no explanation, no, I'm proud of you. Not even at the end. Just a line I recognized from a poem she used to read out loud when we were little. And the winter power flickered, and we all pretended to listen. I turned the key in the front door 2 days later. The lock stuck, then gave with a sigh like the house was bracing itself. The air inside was a familiar mixture, cedar and dust and something sweet underneath that I could never quite name. I stood for a long time in the front hall, letting the quiet settle on my shoulders, hearing the faint, insistent tick of the brass clock on the mantel. My mother wound that clock every Sunday afternoon. It hadn't missed a beat. Neither had she. The living room looked exactly as she left it. Lace curtains yellowed at the edges, afghans folded in strict rectangles, books stacked by height, not author, because beauty matters even if no one else notices. The piano had a strip of faded sun across the closed lid, a pale reminder of mornings I longed for and never got back. I should have called a junk service. I should have taken photos for the realtor, boxed the keepsakes, labeled the rest for donation. That's what practical women do at my age. We reduce, we sort, we streamline. Instead, I set my bag down and walked the rooms the way we used to as kids, clockwise from front to back, touching the banister, testing the loose floorboard in the dining room with my heel, avoiding the sixth stair that squeaked like a scold. In the kitchen, a glass was turned upside down to dry on the rack. The dish towel hung in its precise third. Her grocery list, milk, tea, onions, was magneted to the fridge in a tidy column. I pressed my fingers to the paper like a pilgrim touching a relic, and then pulled away. There is a kind of cruelty in the ordinary. It goes on without you. I didn't plan to sleep there that night, but evening slipped through the rooms and I couldn't make myself leave. I found the extra linens in the hallway cupboard, the lavender sachets brittle with age, and made up the bed in my old room, blue wallpaper with tiny white sprigs, a line of trophies from school spelling bees I had forgotten I'd won. The house ticked and settled around me, a living thing learning the rhythm of a new breath. It was the wind that woke me, or that's what I told myself. The hour was one of those narrow ones, the world held in a small hand between midnight and dawn. The room smelled like rain that wasn't coming, and something else. Old paper, warmed by the day and whispering back its secrets to the dark. I slipped my feet into slippers and followed the scent into the hall, past the bathroom with the seashell soap that no one was allowed to use, to the pull-down ladder in the ceiling, the attic. We weren't permitted up there when we were small. Mice and splinters, Mother would say. Nothing but old junk. But I knew better. I'd seen the way she'd press her palm to the hall ceiling sometimes, quietly like a prayer. The ladder creaked under my weight. The attic greeted me like an old cat, dusty, disinterested, faintly offended that I had disturbed its sleep. A single bulb hung from a cord, and when I pulled the chain, the light flickered twice, then came steady. Boxes lined the sharply sloped walls, labeled in my mother's hand. Christmas, photographs, school, taxes. What I noticed first was what didn't have a label. A cedar trunk, scuffed and scarred, pushed all the way back, a quilt folded over the top like a guard. It wasn't locked. The hinges gave with a soft, sticky sigh as though the air inside hadn't been disturbed for years. The first thing I saw was a white envelope with my name on the front. Not, "Dear Anna," not my daughter, just my name, printed carefully, the ink a little watery at the ends of the strokes. I didn't open it, Not right away. Beneath the envelope lay a stack of notebooks, the kind my mother bought at the start of every school year for her students. Black speckled composition books with sturdy spines and lines that kept your secrets tidy. Each one had a date range written neatly on the cover: 1976, 1978, 1983, 1985. Some went all the way back to before I was born. The last one at the bottom simply said, after. I carried the top three downstairs like contraband and made tea the way she did. The old brown pot, the water not quite boiling so it wouldn't bruise the leaves. I sat at the kitchen table with the bulb casting an amber circle and the rest of the room in its old soft gloom. The first page crackled when I opened it. My mother's handwriting leaned right, patient, disciplined, like a woman who would not hurry herself for anyone. September 12th, 1976. If I don't put this somewhere, the truth will turn into something else. Paper is safer than memory. Memory edits, paper doesn't. I read that sentence twice and felt my pulse climb into my throat. They weren't diaries in the way I expected. There were no gossiping details about neighbors or lists of chores or petty irritations about father leaving his socks under the bed. They were accounts, precise, spare, dates, times, weather. The kind of notes a nurse might keep for a patient or a scientist for an experiment. Except the patient was our family, the experiment was a life, and my mother was the only witness who cared enough to write it down. October 2nd, 1976. Michael wakes with night terrors again. Doctor says he'll grow out of it. He doesn't see the way he clings to the doorframe like a sailor in a storm. I hold him and count backwards from 100. Anna sleeps with one hand open. She trusts the room. I smiled, then froze when the next entry snapped the air thin. October 16th, 1976. He came again. I put the chain on the door, I braced the chair under the knob, but the chain is old and the wood is older. He smelled like menthol and winter air. I told him the children were sleeping. He said he couldn't help himself. I did not scream. Screaming never helped anything in this house. I had to put the book down. My cheeks were hot, my hands had gone cold. I could feel the old kitchen around me, unchanged and suddenly foreign. The clock on the mantel ticked, 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 as if it had been counting down to this moment for decades, and we had both finally arrived. I don't know how long I sat like that, my mother's words a weight in my lap. When I could breathe again, I turned the page. There were no names. My mother never wrote the word father or husband in those passages. There was only he. But there were details. The way the garage door groaned, the boot scrape on the front mat, the tone of his voice when he'd had whiskey. My mother recorded it all in a steady hand, as if she were keeping a ledger of weather, and maybe that is exactly what it was. A record of storms no one else would acknowledge. I found the place where I was born. January 4th, 1978. Snow, roads impassable. The nurse with the soft braid said, "You did this alone?" I did not correct her. Sometimes the truth is too heavy for strangers to carry. And then, 2 pages later, a sentence that split the floor under my feet. January 17th, 1978. Anna's eyes are not his. Anna's eyes. I closed the book, the breath leaving me like I'd been pushed under. In the silence, I could hear the furnace flicker, the old pipes ping, the house swallowing and releasing air like a living chest. I was 48 years old and did not know who my father was. Or rather, I knew who he wasn't. In the second notebook, the entries shifted. The same careful hand, the same reporting, but the tone narrowed, sharpened. There were days without lines at all, and then 2 pages poured out in one sitting. June 3rd, 1983. Michael fell from the oak. 3 stitches. He cried less than I did. Anna won the spelling bee. No one came. July 12th, 1983. He came to the back door this time. The chain held. There were small, bright things, too, like stitches in a torn hem. August 19th, 1983. Anna hung the laundry without being asked. She matched the socks by feel, not pattern. I think that is what love is, a way of knowing in your hands. But each bright thread had a shadow tucked beside it, an accounting of what could not be said out loud. October 22nd, 1984. Paul asked why I checked the locks 3 times. I told him habit. He watched me count. He is a good boy. He believes the explanations we give him because believing is easier than admitting he sees the same cracks I do. I read until the kettle went cold and the light outside shifted from blueberry into the pale gray of a winter morning. When the birds began their tentative clicks and trills, I realized I was trembling. The notebooks had a gravity. They pulled and pulled until I wasn't sure I could set them down and stand up. I stood anyway. I washed the teacup. I made the bed. I opened the front curtains and let the day in like a visitor. I was finally ready to greet. Then I went back to the attic for the envelope with my name on it. I carried it downstairs as if it might bruise. At the table, I slid a butter knife under the flap and opened it with the same care my mother used on Christmas paper she wanted to save for another year. The letter inside was 2 pages. My name stood alone at the top. Not dear, not sweet girl, none of the softness I had wanting. Just Anna in block letters, as if she wanted to make sure it didn't go to someone else by mistake. I have kept these books for the same reason one keeps a lighthouse, or it began. Not to explain the ocean, only to keep it from swallowing the boats in the dark. I read the letter once, twice. It wasn't an apology. My mother never did learn how to say sorry without first clearing a courtroom in her head. It wasn't a confession either, it was a map. She told me about the year before I was born, about a man who fixed the church roof after the spring storms, a man with careful hands and a laugh that made her look up even when she was determined not to. She told me about a glance that lasted too long, a kindness that arrived exactly when she had given up expecting it, a choice she made with her whole heart and then carried like contraband for 48 years. She did not give me his name. She gave me a place, a town 2 hours south, a hardware store with a red door, a date she went back every year and stood across the street, not going in. Keep what's worth keeping, she wrote at the end, which is not the pain, Anna. It never was. It is the truth. It's the only inheritance I could be sure wouldn't rot. I pressed the paper flat with both palms. My mother's voice, so measured in life, felt different on the page, as if she had finally allowed herself to speak at the volume she needed. I felt anger too, rising like a hot wind. She could have told me while she was alive. She could have spared me decades of standing outside her locked rooms with my ear to the wood. But grief is a thief that steals from both sides. I understood that now. By late afternoon, I had stacked the notebooks in order on the dining room table, the same place we once lined up school projects and Thanksgiving pies. I made a second pot of tea and called Paul. He didn't pick up. I called again. I needed his voice. I needed someone else to feel the tilt under my feet. He answered on the third ring, breathless. Hey, everything okay? I'm at the house, I said. There are journals, Mom's, a lot of them. A pause. What kind of journals? The kind that turn the floor into a river, I said. The kind you either walk across or drown in. He didn't speak for a moment. Then quietly, do I want to know? Yes, I said, but maybe not all at once. We made a plan. He'd come by Sunday. We'd read together as much as he could bear. We'd decide what to do with what we found. We'd be, what? Siblings again? Co-keepers of a light our mother had tended alone for too long? I didn't know, but I knew I didn't want to be the only person in the room with the truth. That night, sleep came in thin sheets. I dreamed the house was a chest, and every time I opened a drawer, another tide came in. I woke at dawn and did not pick up the notebooks. I made oatmeal the way she did with salt and a dollop of jam. I ate it standing. I watered the ficus that hadn't died, as if it had been waiting for me to come back and remember how to care for living things. When the doorbell rang, I assumed it was Paul early, but it wasn't. A woman stood on the porch with a paper bag of oranges and a face I recognized and couldn't place. Her hair was the exact gray of rain before it starts, and her coat was one of those wool ones that last through 5 winters without complaint. Anna, she said, and smiled. And I knew. Mrs. Green from 2 houses down. She brought us ginger ale when we had measles. She told me not to marry too young. She taught my mother how to prune roses when the bush out front got ideas above its station. I heard about Eleanor, she said softly. I brought these. They're from my sister's tree. It's ridiculous, really, what a body thinks might help. Thank you, I said, taking the bag. The oranges smelled like sun. She peered past me into the hall. She kept it beautiful, she said, even at the end. She kept it controlled, I said, then winced at how sharp I sounded. Mrs. Green studied me with those eyes old women get when they've stopped pretending, kind and merciless in the same breath. Eleanor kept a great deal, she said. Ask me for what you need to know, and I'll tell you what I'm allowed. Allowed by whom? I asked. She tapped her chest. By the woman who still loves your mother and also owes you the dignity of a straight answer. I didn't invite her in. I stepped out onto the porch and let the cold air make me honest. Who is my father? I asked. And please don't say the man who raised me. Mrs. Green didn't flinch. She looked down at her hands, then up at me. Your mother told very few people, she said. I was one, not his name. She wouldn't harm his children by unmaking the story they built. But she told me enough to know she loved him, and that he loved her in the way a person loves a light they're not allowed to carry home. Is he alive, or? I asked. For now, she said. And I suppose that makes everything harder and easier at once. She squeezed my arm and left me on the porch with a bag of oranges and a house full of paper. When I went back inside, I opened the last notebook, the one labeled After. The first page was dated the day my father left for good. The handwriting was smaller, more compressed, as if she'd been writing through a too tight space. After, she wrote, is a country you cannot see from before. I read until my eyes stung. I read about choices and their costs. I read about the way love does not cancel harm, it only explains it. I read about my mother making peace with the fact that justice and mercy rarely arrive together in the same carriage. I read about me and my brothers in a way she never spoke in life. Not as projects to manage, but as miracles that kept the house from going dark. I read something I did not know I needed to hear. Anna Kiter, she wrote, you were the only one who believed me while I was still learning to believe myself. You thought I was strong because I was quiet. Sometimes I was just quiet. But I see you. I have always seen you. The kettle sang. The clock ticked. A sparrow tried and tried again at the window, confusing its own reflection for company. I pressed my hands to my mother's words and felt the whole house breathe around me. I had inherited a mortgage and a cracked foundation, yes. I had inherited 1,000 tiny, disciplined acts that kept a life stitched together when no one noticed the seams. And I had inherited, finally, what she meant me to have. The truth. I didn't know yet what to do with it. Whether to call the hardware store with a red door, whether to knock on a stranger's life and ask to borrow a face that looked like mine, whether to burn what could burn and spare the living. But I knew what I wouldn't do. I would not lock the attic. I would not pretend the ocean was just weather. I would not go back to loving my mother only in the past tense. When Paul came on Sunday, I would put a notebook in his hands and say, we will keep what's worth keeping. We will blow the rest away. And then I would open the front door and let the house hear itself say our names out loud like a blessing. I folded the letter and slid it into my sweater pocket. I washed the teacup again, though it was already clean. I stood in the hall beneath the attic ladder and touched the ceiling with my palm the way my mother used to, quietly, like a prayer. Okay, I said to the empty house that wasn't empty anymore. I'm listening.